Bruce Reimer, and welcome to Bruce Reimer's Hot Rodding channel. For those of you who aren't familiar with my channel, Bruce Reimer's Hot Rodding channel is dedicated to building extremely low buck hot rods and customs. For those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I'm best known for the Model A Woody that I built entirely from scratch. You can view the Woody build right here on Bruce Reimer's Hot Rodding channel. Okay, so today on the 8th episode of Bruce Reimer's Hot Rodding channel, we're going to take a look at part 2 of the Stranger build, and we'll continue on with that in just a minute. But I'm going to do something a little different in this video, which is give you an idea of where I live. This is what it looks like where I live right now. Most of my property is under about 3 feet of snow, and I'm just heading toward my shop here. As you can see, it's nothing fancy. It's one bay. I built the shop myself about 13 years ago. Didn't have a whole lot of money to build it. Built the shop basically the way I build hot rods and customs. I do it all myself with very little money. As you can see, there's the Woody's winter home right next to the shop, and now we're coming up to the shop door. I'm going to give you a quick little shop tour today. Nothing real terribly fancy in here. Ooh. This is what I call the engine room. Like I said, I have one bay, so this is just an addition onto the one bay. I got to have a chop saw. As you can see here, these are all of these, or some of the suspension parts that I detailed to go onto the Stranger. I have a basic 10-inch drill press. You'll probably be familiar with this. That's where the spot where I do my monologue at the beginning of my show. And this here is the 351 Windsor that's going to be going into the Stranger. It's a 94 truck roller block. I'm going to do a basic rebuild like I did with most of my other projects. It's going to be basically rings and bearings. Other than that, I'm going to put a factory 4-barrel intake on it and a Holley carb, and I'm going to use a factory Mustang 5-liter roller cam, which is a little bit hotter than the truck cam. Will make a great street cam, along with some porting on the heads. Okay, so we'll go from here into the main shop area. My shop is pretty well equipped. I've got a motor crane, and I also have a shop press, and I have an 8-gallon compressor, which is technically not adequate to paint a vehicle, and yet I have managed somehow to paint several vehicles with that little unit. Anyways, back to the Stranger build. For those of you who have seen part 1, you're probably thinking at this point, oh, what happened? Well, I stripped it all back down now. As you remember from before, I was basically had done most of the body work, and the truck was completely assembled, and now it's all in pieces. And that is because at this point I tore it all back down so that I could detail the frame and do some modifications to the frame. And of course, I'll give you a step by step later on in the video of everything that I've done to the frame. Plus, I will backtrack a little bit, and I'm going to continue on from part where I left off in part 1, and I'll show you the rest of the details of the body work that I did before I took it all apart. And you'll also be able to see the Stranger in primer with a set of wheels that I found for it. So at this point, I guess I'd just carry on with the slideshow, and you can see the rest of the progress. Before I tore it down, this is what the Stranger looked like wearing a coat of PPG multi-purpose primer. When a neighbor gave me these 03 Ranger wheels, I didn't even think of the Stranger. After I stacked them in my woodshed for only a few days, it occurred to me, free wheels. I traced the previous photo to color in the paint scheme I came up with. After changing my mind several times, it hit me, lying awake one night. A 50s era two-tone pastel blue and white. I think I nailed it. Now that we've got a clearer vision of the end game, let's back up a bit and carry on from part 1. Narrowing the cowl required a custom fabricated panel built from 20 gauge sheet metal. Which, after some fitting and trimming, I tack welded into place. Reinstalling the fender confirms that my patch panel is a perfect fit. The custom grill began again with 20 gauge sheet metal I formed to fabricate the grill shell. The grill itself began as a length of exhaust pipe I squashed in the bench vise to produce an oval shape. The center of the grill consists of 6 different sizes and lengths of tubing. And the signal light bezel is a simple piece of exhaust pipe. After welding the center tubes to a base, I welded it all together in a jig so that it wouldn't warp. Then I added a decorative ring that I bent around a water pump pulley in my shop press. Finally, a piece of steel mesh is used to tie it all together. There you have it, the one and only Art Deco style custom grill built to fit an extremely narrowed Ford Ranger. I couldn't simply cut the hood to fit. It had to be cut in sections so that there would be sides and a rear. As you can see, this would require chopping the hood into 4 pieces. After it was sewn back together, it left a 2-inch gap I later filled with a piece cut from a donor hood. After the hood was filled, I fabricated a filler panel for the cowl screen. Since a Roadster would require no door handles or keyholes, I filled them as well.
and while I was working on the doors, I also welded up the mirror mounting bolt holes. After the cab modifications were done, it was on to building a subfloor. I fabricated the subfloor from 1 inch by 1 inch by 1/8 inch wall square tubing. These will also serve as the cab mounts. A chop saw isn't a necessity for fabrication, but man, what a time saver. Well worth the money. After the floor was completed, I moved on to the box, which started off as framework to mount the fenders. These 31-inch trailer fenders were on the Woody before I went fenderless. The only part of the box I used was the outer skin, which I chopped to 48 inches. To which I added a radius to the fender well to fit the new fenders and a flange to mount it to the cab. Between the last stage and the primer was a lot of boring, filling, and sanding, so I'm fast forwarding straight to this shot I took in front of my shop. Note the bulge in the fender I created to clear the front springs. Unfortunately, I lost any photos of the details when my computer crashed. Now take a look, because it's the last you'll see of a semi-finished project for a while. What you saw in part 1 and the previous photos was the mock-up stage of the build. This to me is the only way to do a build like this properly. Even if I left it together and carried on, I would still have to pull the drivetrain for rebuilding and lay under the truck to build exhaust, etc. This will be so much simpler and faster in the long run. Most importantly, it gives me a chance to detail every single nut, bolt, and part. This process began with wire wheeling the entire frame to turn this disgusting mess into something I could actually work with. Getting a rusted out piece of crap to look like this clean should only be done with a heavy-duty wheel on an angle grinder. You can use a drill, but it will take at least twice as long. After wire wheeling the entire frame, I began welding up all of the random factory holes, many of which seemed to serve no purpose. This is the exact same spot on the frame with the holes filled and the spring perch bolted on. Once the entire frame has been filled, sanded, primed, and painted, it will be of show car quality. That's all the time I have for now, so I will leave you with my vision for the finished product. Please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to see part 3 right here on Bruce Reimer's Hot Rodding channel.